You just experienced the 7th inning stretch. So we are ready to proceed. Running a little over time, but no extra charge for all this stuff going on today. Sunday after Easter, otherwise known as the Big Letdown. We celebrated last week with the unusual crowds that gather for that great event. The early birds down at the beach and people at the 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock services. Now we're back to normal, and that's okay because that's how life is. Up one day and down the next. Well, the first Sunday after Easter, there are generally two themes that seem to emerge as most popular. One has to do with that familiar story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus to whom Jesus appears. The other one has to do with Thomas, the scripture which we just read together. Emmaus or Thomas? Which way to go? I decided to go in the direction of Thomas for a very irrational reason. A dear friend and colleague in ministry is visiting here today, sitting here with my wife, Leslie Oakes, who was here at this church many years ago. She lives on Thomas Drive. And she's a minister at St. Thomas Church. So how could I miss? Today it's Thomas. Next week, it's the road to Emmaus with Michael preaching. Talk about Thomas, we need to go to Jerusalem, but like our choir tour, it's not a nonstop. We have to stop briefly first in London. The whole world's been watching London, as you know. But let's bypass Westminster Abbey and the cleanup crews working there. Go over rather to the east side, the poorer part of town. With a little luck and research, you might there find a nondescript church building known as the City Temple. If you're there on Sunday, there may be, 40 or 50 people in worship, which is not bad for London. But you'll also see some pictures of the congregation in its heyday. You'll see pictures of people who stood in line for up to 2 hours just to get into church. What was the big attraction? You walk up behind the pulpit, and there's a little niche there where the former pastor by the name of Leslie Weatherhead is buried. The pastor of this great church who led them through troubled times and who packed them in. One of the great Christian voices of the last century. His published sermons are still studied and stolen by seminarians and others looking for good material to preach. Well, one of the few pleasures of growing older, but a pain for those who have heard it all before, is you get to repeat yourself. Now, Michael here is not that old. He doesn't have any gray hair. But he repeated himself last Sunday. He kept saying, "Did you get it?" Talking about the resurrection. And I hope we got it. I hope we get it today because this is important. I refer to my own bout with debilitating depression some 30-odd years ago. One of the many helpful things that my newfound friend by the name of John Calhoun brought to me was a biography of Leslie Weatherhead, written by his son. John had no idea that I held Weatherhead in such high regard, and I had no idea until I read the biography that Weatherhead himself had experienced severe depression and doubt, had to take a year off from his ministry and recuperate down on the south coast of England. Feeling he'd conquered his inner demons, he came back to the pulpit only too early and had to take more time off to regain his health. But he did regain his spiritual and emotional health and continued his ministry for many years with even deeper faith and insight growing out of that experience. As I read that biography, I remember thinking, wow, if this pulpit giant and world-renowned pastor can have a period of depression, I can too. If he can walk through such a valley and emerge in the light of day, I can too. My own disillusionment and depression was not nearly as severe as his. But with the help of God and professional care and Christian community and at least one good friend, it can be overcome, as it was in my case. Doubt. Doubt then takes us on to Jerusalem and Thomas. As we first heard in the scripture reading, when Jesus appeared to the disciples that first Easter evening, Thomas was out to lunch. And we don't know why he was not there with the others. We can only speculate, and when all is said and done, that's all it's going to be, is speculation. We can understand if he felt crushed, abandoned, depressed. Maybe he just wanted to be alone, to pout and sulk and nurse his own grief. I say maybe because that's how a lot of us seem to deal with things. We just want to be by ourselves, to go into our cave and be left alone. That's not the best way to do it. It's not the best way to handle it, to be AWOL from the help that might be right there in front of you. I think it's Billy Graham who once pointed out that an ember removed from the fire off by itself soon dies. There was once a woman by the name of Jean Nidich. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Has anybody heard of her? Can you correct me on the name? I'd never heard of her either. But she weighed 214 pounds, couldn't get rid of that extra weight, tried every diet she could think of, finally went to an obesity clinic for help. A special diet combined with the support of a like-minded group did the trick. She was able to talk about her eating problems with others who were having the same problems. Soon she was inviting her friends to her house, and they started weekly meetings where they could give and receive mutual support. And thus begun what's now known as Weight Watchers. One of the many groups that people find crucial in dealing with emotional, physical, spiritual, social problems. And that is a big part of what Manhattan Beach Community Church is all about. As many of you have discovered, mutual support in times of need is one of the strengths which we have verbalized in our core values statement. But Thomas, dear Thomas, he had not yet discovered that in his own life. According to tradition, Thomas would later take the gospel to India, where even today he is regarded as the patron saint of the Christian community in India. And we can learn from those people. One of them, a man named D.T. Niles, a great pastor. A woman came to him who had drifted away from the church, who was having various problems, and she told Dr. Niles that God had become distant to her. Pastor Niles said, not only now, but even in the future, there will be times when God seems distant, when it looks as if God has forgotten and does not care, when prayers go unanswered and life is difficult. At such times, he said, you must learn to hold on to your Christian friends. Your difficulty is you tried to hold on to God alone. Man was never intended to hang on to God alone. But Thomas had not yet found that out. When told by the other disciples that Christ was alive, that they had seen him, Thomas says, oh, I don't think so. Let's be serious. Come on, get real. I mean, dead is dead, and Jesus is dead. So we call him Doubting Thomas. And with that, we can all feel agreement, identification. Someone's pointed out there's about 3 ways you can deal with doubt. We've all seen these, I'm sure. One is to be a confirmed skeptic and doubt everything. You can take pride in such an approach. Assume an attitude of arrogance. Recognize that you're smarter than anybody else. On the other extreme, you can doubt nothing. Just accept everything that's been given to you. A lot of us were taught that way. And if you doubt, you're on the road to the hot place. But Thomas and others like Leslie Weatherhead show us a third and more constructive way, and that's when the biblical narrative continues. We see that Thomas wants to believe. He's just having a hard time doing it. He wants more concrete evidence, more personal experience. Good old Woody Allen, he once wrote, "If God exists, why doesn't he give me some sign, like depositing $1 million in my name in a Swiss bank?" That's not a big deal in today's economy. I get these emails all the time, you do too, telling me I've inherited millions of dollars from some widow in Africa. But Woody Allen makes a point. The question he's raising is, why does God keep us guessing? I don't know. Maybe God knows more about what he's doing than we do. Maybe to develop a meaningful spiritual life, we're going to have to struggle. Faith, perhaps, must be a challenge. I know it is for me, and I've been working on it all my life. But there has been enough evidence to keep me asking the questions and to keep me hanging in there and working through my doubts and trying to share with others what I do know for sure, trying to be a friend and an encourager to those who are struggling. Again, Leslie Weatherhead has said, "On half a dozen occasions, I have had experiences which, for me, made me certain of the reality of some supernatural entity, or whom I label God. One," he says, "was among the foothills of the Himalayas. One was at Vauxhall Station. One on a railway bridge at Woolwich. One in the lounge at a Sandwich conference. Once during the writing of a sermon. And once at a Holy Communion service when the bombs were falling near us." Well, fortunately, we do not hear or feel the impact of bombs here in Manhattan Beach. In fact, as I've often heard people say and said it myself, one more day in paradise. This is one of those days. But even here, as you well know, it starts caving in on us sometimes, and it may be some personal loss, some major disappointment with someone you loved and trusted, some unexpected behavior, the disorientation perhaps of losing one's job, a sense of monotony, driving the same route, seeing the same people doing the same thing day after day. Maybe just plain old bald-faced doubt about some of the basic pegs upon which you hang your faith. And my experience has paralleled that of many of you. In admitting to ourselves the condition we're in, facing and identifying our doubts, we seem to somehow be more receptive to what God would say to us. I sometimes think of it as a recollection of some Bible verse or the encouragement of a friend.